Hey book lovers, Kaylee here, and welcome back to the Enchanted Library. Today I have for you my January wrap-up. Alright, I read a lot of books this month, or last month, so I guess I should just dive right in because there is about 18 here, and that's a lot of books. Probably my best reading month, I think, ever in recent memory, so let's get into it. The first book that I read in January is Codename Helen by Ariel Lawhon, and this is a historical fiction novelization of the life of Nancy Wake, or at least a portion of her life. She was a spy in the war, amongst other things, like a freelance journalist, and is just a fascinating woman in general. And this book covers a portion of her life leading up to the war and the war itself. It was absolutely fascinating. I gave this like a 5 out of 5 stars. If you are interested at all in historical fiction, war fiction, espionage, just a lovely story that breaks your heart but is just absolutely amazing, definitely recommend this one. I also read this for part of the hashtag Read What You Own 2021 challenge that I'm participating in all year. So as I go through these books, actually I'll let you know what readathons and challenges and goals they relate to based on like previous videos that I've had on here and my goals and everything, so I will try and remember to do that as well. So at the start of this year I was actually finishing up my Intro to Children's Lit course, and one of the books that we had to read for that was And Tango Makes Three by Justin Richardson, and that is also included on this list because it is part of hashtag Read What You Own and it works for a middle grade or picture book prompt, so I included that. Even though it was only like 32 pages, absolutely love this story. It is also a 5 out of 5 stars. The illustrations are beautiful, the actual story and premise is so lovely, and I just think it is a must read for so many children. Next up we have another book for hashtag Read What You Own, and that is The Osiris Ritual by George Mann. This is book 3 this is book 2 in the series of Newbery and Hobbs. I've been reading a lot of these books lately and they're all getting mixed together, but this one covers, again, further investigations from Newbery and Hobbs. I don't want to spoil too much, but basically they're in like an alternate universe, Victorian England place, and there's a lot of steampunk elements, a ton of steampunk elements, which is actually one of my big draws to this series, and they have to uncover mysteries. Newbery actually works for the crown, so he has to obey anything that the queen says and go after the different things that she wants uncovered. So he's sort of working as a historian at the museum, also working for the queen, and there's like this lovely relationship between him and Hobbs, and I've been loving this so much. I also read another book from the series this month, so I don't want to mix things up, but if you do like historical fiction, if you do like steampunk, and if you like some mystery and espionage, definitely pick these up. Next up we have a contemporary romance, I think you would call it, but I'm actually thinking about doing a whole other series about uncovering what genres are and things like that, because I feel like they're mislabeled a lot of the times. Like, some people might consider this book a contemporary romance, but I think it is more of a contemporary story with a touch of romance to alleviate the seriousness of the topic. And the cover doesn't really help portray that. It definitely makes it seem more like a rom-com, but that is Head Over Heels by Hannah Orenstein. And this book was a pleasant surprise for me. So it is basically covering a previous Olympic gymnast potential and her fall from that fame, and she ends up working for another gym with a guy who actually did go to the Olympics to help train a new potential Olympian. And it's their story of training this Olympian but also uncovering all of the hidden and darker parts of the industry and touching on it in such a wonderful way. I feel like this is a really good discussion book, and I really appreciated it. Like, I was not expecting it going in to be such a poignant discussion on gymnastics, but Hannah Orenstein did a really good job. I had a couple of issues with it, but probably the thing that stands out to me the most is how much defining there was in this book. Like, if you're not in the know of gymnast culture and what different routines and things are, this really tells you what they are, what the names of them are, and what is done, so you can sort of help visualize it. I could have done without all of the defining and just been along for the ride, so that sort of took me out of it a little bit, but overall the story was amazing. I definitely do recommend it, whether you're a fan of gymnasts or gymnastics or not. I feel like a lot of people can take a lot from this book. Next, we have a book that I actually borrowed, and I'm using it as part of my goal to read more feminist literature. And that book is Why We March: Signs of Protest and Hope, Voices from the Women's March in 2017. This book, I mean, some people might not consider it like a proper book because it is a lot of images. It is primarily images of protests and signs from the Women's March. But it does also have like some quotes and things from prominent women in history and of the time. And I just had so many emotions going through these pages and seeing what people were fighting for and the different signs that were made and the different topics that were discussed. Just so many emotions going through this. I definitely do recommend it. It's one that I think I will buy for myself because it's one of those things that we talked about the Women's March so much back when it happened, but then I feel like it sort of dropped off, never to be thought of again. And I think having books like this help keep it front and center, so that way we remember that there is so much more to do and so much more to come. So I really did love this book and highly recommend it as well. Now we're leading into the books that I read for Medievalathon. I will do a proper wrap-up of Medievalathon because it does technically run from it ran from January 10th until February 10th, so there are still a few days left. I don't think I'm going to be adding any more books to that readathon because I've completed all of the prompts, but there is a future video coming for this, so I'll just go over these briefly. But the first book that I picked up was Prudence by Gail Carriger, and this is book 1 in the Custard Protocol? Yeah, the Custard Protocol series. I honestly would have DNF'd this book had it not been for it being for prompt number 1 for Medievalathon. I should have unhauled this book years ago. This has been sitting on my shelf for years. This does also work for the hashtag Read What You Own 2021 challenge because I've held on to it for so long. But it's really not my type of genre. I was initially drawn to it, I know, because it had steampunk elements. And it talked about tea, and I love steampunk and I love tea, so I was thinking that it was going to be this amazing adventure story. It really was not what I was hoping. It's very loosely steampunk in the fact that it has a dirigible, but there's really no other steampunk elements to it than that, and it was just not an interesting and intriguing story. There was a lot of issues in terms of names in this. It seemed like every other word was a name, a nickname, a title, just something. And the romance wasn't, I don't know, it tried to be ahead of its time, but also was very not good. I can't even have proper thoughts about this because I wanted to just take it out of my brain. I will be unhauling this once we are able to do that, once COVID restrictions are lifted again, but I wouldn't recommend this. Oh, also another thing was that there are werewolves and vampires in here. So I'm not a werewolf and vampire person, so that was a really big miss for me. So if you like that, then you might really be into this series, but for me, Next up for Medievalathon and hashtag Read What You Own, I have a book that is the first book in a series again. I've already done a whole video on this. I'll make sure that it's up here so then that way you can watch it if you so choose. I did lose a few subscribers over it, but it is The Duke and I by Julia Quinn. Again, not going into too much detail with this because I do have a fairly long video on it. Started out really, really loving this book. Thought that it was going to be one of my favorite books of the year, even though it was only January. But halfway through the book, some very not good stuff happened. I don't want to go into too many spoilers because I do have that video, but that just dropped it down for me in ratings and is not a book that I would recommend. Don't think I'm going to be continuing on with the series, but you never know because I hear that the problems I had with this book don't happen in the other books. So we'll see what happens there. Okay, more Medievalathon and hashtag read what you own. I ended up reading the poetry of Emily Dickinson, and this is from the Everyman's Library Pocket Poets edition. I also have the Tennyson edition of this, and I do want to collect them all. They're absolutely lovely. I love the way that they're laid out. It had been a long time since I read any poetry from Dickinson, and I did not realize the amount that she actually did. So I was very interested in these. The only issue that I had, it's very hard for me to rate poetry, but the way that this was sort of bound together and edited, I would say my only issue was that under the header of love poems, it was really more nature poems, where she talks a lot about flowers and animals and bugs and things. So I don't know why that was put under the love header, but either way, really enjoyed it. A lot of really great poems in here. Don't know how else to review this, to be completely honest, but really liked it. Next up, I read book 3 in the Newbery and Hobbs investigation series, and that is the Immorality Engine. Again, this is for Read What You Own 2021 and Medieval-a-thon, and this book I think I even, in my updates for Medieval-a-thon, called this the Immortality Engine, but it's the Immorality Engine. Again, just same as when I talked about the second one. Really great investigation series. Steampunk, alternate universe historical, Victorian England. Have a really good time reading these. Still on Medieval-a-thon and Read What You Own, and that is Edenbrook by Julianne Donaldson. This book I didn't fully know going into it really what it was. I was under the impression that there was going to be like a mistaken identity twin swap situation. Oh my goodness, this book, that didn't happen, but I was so happy with this book. This book was so soft, it was so sweet, it was so lovely, it had some action in it, but it also just, I want to reread this book already. Like, the moment I put it down, I wanted to reread it. It was just so beautiful. I also love that in this particular edition it includes a little bit of a, I don't know if it'd be a novella, but it includes the heir of Edenbrook, which is actually our hero's story leading up to meeting our heroine, and it was just so lovely. I can't rave about this enough. You essentially have a woman and her sister who end up being split off. Her sister goes into town, so she goes to live in London, while she ends up living with her aunt in the country after their mother dies and their father sort of ventures off to France to sort of deal with his grief on his own. At some point, Cecily is invited to Edenbrook, and the idea is for her to fall in love and make a match with the heir there. In the end, Marianne ends up going to the same place because they are invited to go together, and it's just a series of lovely moments and misunderstandings, but also it is just beautiful. Can't rave about this enough. Next up, we have my first Tad Williams book, and that is Shadow March. This fulfills a couple of prompts as well, but this one is for Read What You Own 2021 and for Medieval-a-thon. This was a fairly big book. I thought it was going to take me a lot longer to read than it did. I ended up blasting through this. I have been wanting a really good adventure, political, sort of fantasy book, and this delivered for sure. The politics were amazing. I loved the majority of the characters, all the different POVs that we go through, absolutely adored. There were two that I was a little hesitant on. So in the synopsis of this book, it really focuses on Beric and Bryony, who are twin siblings, and they end up being thrust into a position of having to look over the kingdom, essentially. Bryony I absolutely loved. Beric started to grate on my nerves a little bit, but I feel like that just means he is going to have a really amazing arc throughout the series, because this is book 1 in a 4-book series, and I cannot wait to see what comes of everything. Essentially, Shadow March, you have a shadow line that splits up sort of fairy and mythical creatures from their world, like the standard like human world, but there are still elements of mythical creatures living amongst them, which is so interesting, and I really love the way that it's done. You have a lot of magic, you have a lot of political issues and subterfuge, and so much going on in this. Lots of different POVs. I love Bryony, I love Vanson, and then I also really like Kinnitan? I never know how to pronounce her name. Kinnitan. Q-I-N-N-I-T-A-N. Didn't think that I would like her character to start, but as her story progresses, I am really interested to see what happens with her. So if you love a good fantasy series, I would highly recommend picking this one up because I thoroughly enjoyed it. Next up for Medievalathon and Read What You Own 2021 is Singapore Sapphire. It is a Harriet Gordon mystery by A.M. Stewart. This book just came to me as a list when I was going through historical mystery series, and this popped up and really drew my attention because it's based in Singapore. I've never read anything that was based in Singapore before, and it is part of my newfound love for historical mysteries. Always loved Sherlock. Can't get enough of Sherlock. But now I have discovered, thanks to a series that I started last year, that I love the pairing of a guy and a girl being smart and going on adventures and solving mysteries, and can't get enough of it. So this is another one of those. This one has Harriet. She ends up moving to Singapore after a few months to live with her brother after the loss of her husband and a bunch of other stuff that happened to her in England and elsewhere. So she is sort of on the down low, trying to live her life, working for a school, not getting paid due to her past, and also looking for funding elsewhere. So she ends up advertising her services as a secretary, and her first boss ends up getting murdered, and she finds the body. So she ends up being thrust into this entire situation and has to help the detective who is on the case, and they don't like each other, but it's kind of like an enemies to friends or haters to friends sort of situation, because obviously this detective, he has his own life, he's got his own relationships, she's got her own issues. There's a lot going on in the background in each of their minds. I am excited to see how this unfolds. The next book came out last year, and I'm definitely going to be picking it up and continuing on with it because I just want to see what comes of these people and what else happens in Singapore, because there is like so much going on with gem trade and warring factions, and it's a lot, but I really enjoyed this one as well. Next up, we have my first buddy read, which was also done as a month-long reading vlog, which I don't know if it's going to be out before or after this video, so spoilers for my thoughts, but that's Ross Poldark by Winston Graham. It is Poldark #1. I picked up this book last year, and so it is part of Read What You Own and Medieval-a-thon. Guys, this book was not my favorite. I had high hopes for it going in, ended up giving it about a 2-star because I had so many issues with the way it was written. I had issues with the characterizations, I had issues with the romance, I had issues with the dialogue. I had a lot of issues with it. Not going to be continuing on with this series. It's just, I'll have more thoughts obviously in my reading vlog, so I'll make sure that that's up here if that comes out before this. But quickie review. Really disappointed. Not going to be continuing on with the series. Next up, we actually have a YA sort of fantasy, I guess, kind of story. Really, really loved it. It's from Megan Bannon. It's Soul Swift. She wrote Bird in the Blade, which I read a few years ago. It absolutely destroyed me. This also absolutely destroyed me. I finished this book at like 1:30 in the morning with tears streaming down my face. Megan Bannon has this beautiful way of absolutely breaking my heart, and I can't recommend her books enough. So this one has a lot of made up religions in it, and the fact that the two warring religions, it's kind of weird to say that religions are warring, but you know, the two warring religions are very similar in their background, but with a few main differences. I found that the description of these differences and the description of these religions was a little hard to follow, so I felt like I was getting them mixed together. But yeah, so that was one of my major gripes with this book, was just having that all organized and explained a little bit better. But I was along for the ride the whole time. As soon as our two main characters get thrust together, I was on board. So it did take me a couple of chapters to really get invested, but like I said, as soon as those two main characters got together, I was ready for an adventure. I feel like I do need to explain a little bit more what this book is about. So essentially you have Jelia, and she is living in a convent because she is thought to be, well, she is a vessel of their presumed god. And she basically has the task of keeping their religion alive and being able to sing the prayers and everything like that. And it is up to her at this summit to translate the words of a prisoner. And that prisoner is Tavik. He is our second lead, and he is from the other religion. And he believes, or his religion believes, that their god is trapped and needs to be set free. So, and the other religion believes that if that god is set free, then hell will let loose. So they basically are warring together, trying to uncover whose religion is right, who's wrong, what actually needs to happen to have this world survive. And it's a lot of introspection, but also a really nice story for Jelia and coming out of a convent and learning more about the world. And I loved it so much. This one is another Read What You Own 2021, but then I also believe it might have been for Medieval-a-thon. I can't remember where I stopped tracking for Medieval-a-thon, but it is A Lady's Guide to Mischief and Mayhem by Amanda Collins. This one was another historical fiction mystery kind of romance book. It sort of has a bunch of different genres mixed in there. Also has a little bit of, well, actually has a lot to do with women's rights of the time, but also has just a lovely story at the center of it, but also a lot of murder. So there's this essentially a commandments killer who is killing people in London and outside of London, England, based on the Ten Commandments. And it's just, there's a lot that's going on in this story. There's a lot more than you can see. I kind of the way that I was sort of describing it in my head is that it's a Clue style mystery, because I thought that this was going to primarily take place in London, England, but it actually takes place in a manor outside of the town. And it makes me just think of Clue, because you have all of these people who could be potential suspects for murder, and you have a detective who has to come in and question everybody and question the town, and yeah. So I just think it's like a Clue style mystery in that sense. But I had such a fun time with this. It's another one that I kind of want to reread already. The romance was pretty quick with it, I felt. Like, one moment they were off and then they were on, and after that though, even though that was a little bit jarring, I was still on board for all of it. Sorry, my card filled up again. I don't know where that cut me off, but Dorsey Armstrong, absolutely love her as a lecturer and a professor. She knows everything about medieval ages, it seems like, and she knows so much about King Arthur. I've already listened to an audiobook and lecture series about King Arthur from her, and I will continue to search for any of her lectures because she is just top-notch. This one was 36 different lectures, all about medieval ages, or the Middle Ages, and it covers so much. Each lecture is a snippet of different aspects of that time. Everything from religion to war to literature, how the day-to-day life of peasants were, how the day-to-day life of nobles were. So much information in here. So if you're interested in that sort of thing at all, definitely recommend this series, and I will continue to be listening to them because they are so good. Only two more left, and the second last book that I read in January was The Wallflower Wager by Tessa Dare. This works for Read What You Own 2021. It does also work for my catch-up series because this is book 3 in Girl Meets Duke by Tessa Dare, and this is probably my least favorite of the series. I give this about a 2-star. I can't quite put my finger on it, but essentially you've got a brooding man and you have a rose-colored lenses girl who just wants to help everyone and be liked. She has her own past that sort of hindered that for a long time, and she's coming into her own and realized she doesn't care what other people think anymore, to an extent. And then this guy, he comes from a very low life, like he did not have anything when he was a child, and he raised himself up in society by making really good investments, and one of his investments was purchasing the house next door to hers and wanting to sell it because she is a lady and people will pay good money to live next door to a proper lady, and he wants to make sure that she stays there, but she's being threatened to be moved back home by her brother if she does not come out in society properly, and if she doesn't get rid of all of her animals because she's an animal lover, and she basically has a menagerie in her home. So brooding guy, rose-colored lenses girl, they come together to try and keep her where she's at, and romance ensues. And then obviously we do have characters from the previous 2 books who intercede in this as well. And yeah, like it seems on paper like it would be a very good read for me, but I don't know, it didn't hit like the other ones did, and I wish that it was better. But yes, so this was my second last book. A little disappointing. I will finish off the series because I think there's only one book left that comes out this year, but yes. And the last book that I read was also a borrowed book, works for my want to read of more feminist literature, and that is Renegade Women in Film and TV by Elizabeth Weitzman. This one was so fascinating. Like, it was a quick, relatively quick read, but it has like a lovely one page about really basic information about the person, has really gorgeous illustrations on the other page, and it just covers some of their main contributions into film and television on behalf of women. And I just thought that all of these were so interesting, and I have not heard of so many of these women. And this is another one that I think I'm going to be purchasing for myself eventually, because I think that it is great to have this sort of a thing just to flip through and remind yourself of what's come before and things that women have had to do before you to make sure that you have what you have today. So it's just women making waves in film and TV, and it's fascinating. Absolutely adored it, and another one that I would very much recommend. So overall, January was a very solid reading month. Like I said, probably my best reading month to date, and I don't think I'm going to be doing that many books going forward in a month, just due to like school and work and everything else that's going on. But hey, I am so happy with my January reads. There were a couple of misses, but a lot more wins. I think I was averaging maybe around 3.5 stars overall for what I was reading this month. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with the turnout. So be sure to like this video if you did like it, or if you've read any of these books or have any thoughts and opinions on them. Be sure to subscribe to my channel for more content and hit that bell notification so that way you are always aware anytime I post a new video. And until next time, keep reading.